And this I've cleaned, so I want to lubricate this with some molybdenum paste. I'm interested in the inside edge where it runs against the lens tube, the outside edge where it runs on various components and catches. On the underside here, don't get too much of this. Just want to check that that surface there has got some on it. And here on the bird paw, I'll put some on the tail of the bird paw and on the tip of the head of the bird paw. I'm just looking, there's another thread of cotton on here I don't want, that's better. Let's start with our mechanism plate again. And where I want to lubricate on this, again with some molybdenum paste. Is here and here on the tab here that operates the pallets, and on the arm here on that surface where that's driven by the main lever. And that'll do us. Now I can put this into place. I've got to get my spring coupled up, so I'm going to slide that in underneath. I'll pull that B lever back so it's not fouling things up. Pull back that arm. What's holding me up? That lever's holding me up. Pull back that, pull the arm back. Yes, everything's just dropped into place, I think. And hook this spring over its post, which is there. Just checking that things move, and they do. Checking our high-speed springs in the correct position, and it is. The shutter speed settings cam plate, I need to run somewhere around these surfaces, round the centre where it runs on around the lens tube, otherwise it'll be too stiff to move, and where it picks up and drives or compresses the 1/500th of a second speed spring is in that spot there. So I'll just lubricate that corner. That's under a lot of tension there. And this I can swing into position. I've got to hold that B lever back out of the way so it doesn't get trapped underneath here with the tip of the tweezers like that. Okay. That's pretty much it. Now I can see I've forgotten something here. The spring here hooks behind this lever. This is our latch that holds the shutter in the cocked position. That's better. Now it's in position. I've just about forgotten that. That would have stopped us cocking the shutter correctly. So I'll get this in position, hold the B lever back out of the way, get that down in place. Now, if I pull this across, which is on the end of the main lever, I should be able to cock the shutter. And if I fire it, it should open on B and then close. My speed train's not right here. The tab on it, the pin is not sitting correctly. This is not sitting down far enough. So the arm on my retard gear train's not sitting correctly. It's running underneath. So we took it down to, well, that would be B. That arm should be sitting out here somewhere. So what have we got? That's better. That's working. This would be 1/10 of a second. I can see a problem, and the problem is the arm on the retard gear train the pin on it has been bent over. Now you can bend that slightly to adjust the shutter speeds. It's not best practice. Someone's done it and they've made a mess of it by the looks of it. I want to see if I can bend that pin straight back up again. It means I'm going to have to muck around with the rest of the speeds to try and get everything right. But there really isn't any other option. So let's just have this apart, unhook that spring. If I can get it loose. Unhook the main drive spring off the main lever. And this is what I'm concerned with. This arm here, this little pin on the arm of the retard gear train. It's bent over. It's bent over in this direction towards the centre of the shutter. I need to straighten that up. So I've got to find a tool that'll do that. It's already a mess. I don't want to make more of a mess of it. Well, I've got a hollow punch here from my staking set which will just fit over that pin. Now you can see the angle that that's sitting at. That's the angle that that pin's sitting at. That's how far it's been bent. I want to try and square that up. So it may or may not be successful. I'm bending it back up now. I've moved it some of the way. Let's try a bit more. That's looking pretty good. That's pretty square there now. Of course, I don't know what my speeds will be like because that would have a bearing on the speeds of the shutter. So let's cock this, put my main lever back in place and see if the shutter behaves itself. Mostly I'm interested in seeing if that pin tracks the speed settings cam plate correctly, because previously it did not. That's sitting down in place. Get the spring, hook that into position. That's in place. Get the other spring that goes on here hooked into position. If you move that pin that I've just straightened out, it was bent all over the place. You can, if you move that one way or the other, you can speed up or slow down the effective action of the shutter. And it's a useful method. You're supposed to make subtle changes to it, not fold it right over like whoever'd been into that had done. Let's see if we can get this on here. Get the B lever out from under there. Once that trapped under, that's better. This should be something like 1/10 of a second. Well, it's obviously much slower than that, but the shutter does work, so it means I've got to move my speed train, my retard gear train, in order to get the speeds right. It's running slower than it should do. I'm going to put the cover on the top so I can read what speeds I'm setting things to more accurately, and hopefully get a good indication of what I've got to move and which direction I've got to move it. So I need to clean this because it's probably oily like everything else in the shutter was. And put it in position. Just rotate that latch. Okay, so that gives me a good indication of where my settings are. So that should be a 1/25 of a second. What have I got? That wasn't 100 miles away, it was slightly slow. 1/10 of a second. That's very slow. That's probably taking twice as long to do that as it should do. The 1 second, let's see how that runs. It does run. It did run smoothly. The 1/2 second, it sounded slow. The 5th, definitely. The 10th, yeah, it's definitely slow. So the slowest, I'm going to go and check this on my shutter speed timer and find out how those slow speeds in particular are behaving, because I think the problem's probably going to lie there. What's the 100th of a second go like? That wasn't 100 miles away from where it should be. It's certainly somewhere between a 50th and a 100th, I would say. So that's quite good. And a 500th, you know, I've got to set that before I cock the shutter. It certainly cocks. As usual, a lot of extra forces involved to set that. That's quite prompt. Anyway, I need some more information about these speeds before I make any adjustments. Well, I checked the speeds. The 1 second speed was absolutely bang on. It was right on the money. Everything else sort of was slower in more or less even steps. So I think that I've probably got too much engagement of the arm on the retard gear train rather than the pallets. The pallets I think are probably right because the 1 second was right. But I think the arm has probably got too much engagement and therefore too much resistance. So I'm just going to remove the main lever, if I can get my spring unhooked. That's better. So I've got better access to this retard gear train. What I think I need to do is loosen this screw and swing the retard gear train out slightly for lesser engagement of this arm with the main lever. That's what I think is happening, and I'm about to find out. It screws very tight. See if I can swing that speed train out very slightly, do the screw back up, and then I'll close this back up and check my speeds and see if I've won. Well, my speeds are closer to correct. You know, they're certainly moving in the right direction, but I notice my 500th of a second speed spring is not engaging correctly. Now, it's just not being caught by the main lever, and I've got to find out why that is. It's flopping around and it's not quite long enough at the base to make sure it sticks out far enough to catch that lever. So I'm going to take that out and compare it because I suspect it's slightly misshapen, which means I've got to do a bit of dismantling work. This shutter is not well. I think that's the nicest way to put it. Someone has repaired it in the past and they've done naughty things. So that damaged pin here, or that pin being folded over, is not the only thing that was wrong with this shutter. See if I can get that flash contact out and lift that high speed spring out, and I'll check it, I'll compare it to another one. I suspect it's a slightly different shape. Certainly it doesn't seem to stick out quite far enough. So there's my spring. I'll go and find another one. I found the problem with my high speed spring, and it wasn't the spring itself that was the problem. It was this little arm here, and it was bent out of shape slightly, so it meant that the spring was able to swing around further than otherwise would. Its rest position, in other words, was too far around this way, and it meant that it didn't stick out quite far enough to catch the main lever as it came round for the cocking stroke. So it was a case of just bending the arm slightly back into the shape it should have been. I have to mention that was the arm that was causing a problem by not engaging, wasn't at the right height to engage with the cam in the flash sync mechanism anyway. So it certainly needed some attention. It needed more attention than I'd given it on the first occasion. But this is all go now. The shutter speeds are quite credible. They're a bit slow at the top end, probably half a stop slow. But that's not bad for a shutter as old as this. I believe that the main spring is probably a bit tired in this one. It seems a little bit easier to set than I would otherwise expect, but I don't have a good replacement for that. But certainly the retard gear train had been mucked about with. Whether somebody had made those changes, bent that pin over in an attempt to adjust the speeds correctly, I don't know. But I squared that up. It runs correctly now. The speeds are good, particularly at the lower end. They're right on the money. And I'm quite happy with the state of this shutter. So I'm just going to close it up, put it back in here. And I'm going to put it on the camera. And we want to see if the camera works now in a fairly reliable fashion. So let me just clean up these last few components from the outside and carry on. Well, the first task here is to get the flash sync wire in place, and that's always a little bit awkward. Get the wire in here, hold that in with my finger from the back, find that tiny plastic slug, that little insulating slug, drop that down the hole, find the screw, position that, hopefully get my screwdriver into it without disturbing anything, get that screw to start, run it in. That went very smoothly, suspiciously so. Here's the curved rack. I'll just rub some molybdenum paste on that. If I cock the shutter, it is cocked. I've got to get my curved rack down into the track in the case there. Of course, I released the shutter at the wrong time, so that's now, if I can get that, that's better. Now, that's in place. I'll get the screws in the back of the case. This one's a little bit unusual because, to tell the truth, it's not fairly common to find physical faults with shutters other than the traditional gummed up with oil and so forth. So to find one where things have been misadjusted, we'll say that, is not particularly common. Right, so here's the detents for the aperture settings. I've got to get that spring tucked into the case there and tucked in at this end. That's better. And that's our detents for the aperture settings. And that's all good. We've got our spacer ring that goes under the front lens component, and here's our front lens component and our rear lens component. I'll just clean that spacer ring up. Got a bit of naphtha. Because like everything else, it's likely to be oily. And the lens, I'll clean around the front component here where it screws in. You can see there's a lot of oil and rubbish on there. There shouldn't have been anything on there at all. I don't want to rub any of this naphtha onto the glass because I'll only be transferring oils and so forth that I'll have to try and then clean off. Just looking to see how successful I've been at that. And the rear group, the same deal really, especially where it screws into the back of the shutter. You can see there's quite a bit of oil there. That all has to come off. The problem with any oil gets on here, it'll get onto the glass. If it gets onto the glass, well, then it's just a constant smear basically. You can go crazy trying to clean them. It's very difficult to get oily smears off glass. Right, so these lenses I need to clean with glass cleaner now. In each case I'm going to clean the outside glass first because it's easier to look in from the outside to get an impression of how clean you've got the inside glass rather than the other way. That's because the inner sides are very concave and you can't judge how clean you've got them from reflections. As you can see the reflections you're getting there, on a concave surface you don't get that. So it's very hard to judge how clean you've got things. It's much easier to look through from the front to get an impression. So if I clean the convex surfaces first, I'm in a better position to clean the concave surfaces and see if I'm making an impression. It looks a little bit hazy on that inside surface, I would say, which of course is quite common with the Xenos. We'll see what I can do. So it might be a cleanable haze, a haze of minuscule oil droplets and dust, or it might be uncleanable. It may be the deterioration of the glass surface. And to be honest, you can't tell what you've got until you actually clean the glass and find out. I'll just put that in place on the shutter body. And I'm looking in from the back. And it looks pretty good to me. I can see there is some haze on that inner surface, but it's by no means marked. It looks quite good. And for a xenon lens of this type, that's a good example. So I'll do the front group in the same fashion and then I can put it in place. I've already done the outside surface and the inside surface here. I can see there's a bit of surface haze. And I'm hoping it'll clean off. It's looking very promising. That looks very good. I would say that's a very good example. Slight smear on that outside surface. So, yeah, no, that's good. That's a very good one. Okay, well that lens is good to go. So putting it back on the shutter on the camera body is our next thing to do. Well, we've got our metal shim. The shims are used to space the lens and shutter assembly off from the body so that they will correctly focus at the film plane on a camera body that had previously been set up on the production line to a standard figure. Yeah, this paper shim here is a little bit damaged, but I think I can use it. No, it's obviously crinkled up. It must have been twisted in some fashion when it went on. There are two different thicknesses of paper shim. Yeah, this is folded over here. That's supposed to be folded over like that. So someone made a mess of it when they put this lens and shutter assembly on the camera body on a previous occasion, and those paper shims are damaged. Probably I won't be able to use those. I'm going to go and find another pair. Well, I found my shims. I'll put my paper shims on first with the thinner one in the middle, so it's in the sandwich between the metal and the back of the shutter. And that protects it as best I can protect it. In an ideal work, it's easiest if you're using a paper shim, if it's the appropriate size of course, and if it's in the appropriate space with your metal shims. I try to keep them in between metal shims so they don't get twisted up and damaged. However, that's looking good. Let's see how we get on here. So I'm going to put this shutter back in the body. Check that I've got my timing correct. Obviously not. Tried that. No, I'm at least one notch out here. I'm just changing the timing of the curved rack relative to this front pinion on the transfer shaft, if you like. Let's try that. Okay, there's the shutter firing. So it's cocking and firing. I'm going to check it on a 500, because on a 500 that's where it has the most tension, and if it's not quite getting there, it won't cock on the 500. That's exactly what's happening. So I need one more tooth. About there, let's try that. Okay, so that cocks and fires on a 500 for now. I'll put my retainer ring in the back. Find the tool. Run that down. Zip it up tight. So, if all we wanted to do was fix our shutter on our Retina 2A, the job would now be done. Of course, in this case, really what I want to do is strip and service the entire camera. But this is as much as you would need to do if you were repairing a shutter on a camera that otherwise required no other repairs. I'm not going to show you the process of stripping down and servicing the rest of the camera, because to be honest, this camera works quite well apart from that obvious shutter problem that we had, and it'll be a very straightforward strip down, clean, lubricate and put back together job. So that would have been it. The shutter on a Retina 2A, that was a Synchro-Compur shutter, the early Synchro-Compurs, which were basically Synchro-Compur rapid shutters with the addition of the flash sync setting here, so to give you a choice of 2 flash sync speeds. That was the answer to that particular camera. Now, I was told from the outset that these 2 cameras, they'd belonged to my customer's father. One of the cameras had never worked and the other one used to work but now didn't. I wasn't told which camera was which, but given the state of the shutter in this 2A, I suspect that this was the camera that never worked, and that the Retina 2C had worked fine at one stage in its life. The shutter in the Retina 2C, of course, was the one that responded to the diagnostic technique of using the hairdryer on it, and I'll move on to doing that shutter next.